We are thrilled to welcome back to Nothing But the Truth our good friend Jonathan Schanzer. Jonathan is one of the foremost experts on Middle East and national security, serving as the Senior Vice President for Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. A former terrorism finance analyst at the U.S. Department of the Treasury, he has spent years tracking and exposing the financial networks that fuel terror organizations. His deep understanding of the geopolitical landscape, from Iran's regional ambitions to Hamas, Hezbollah, and beyond, make him an invaluable voice in today's complex world. Jonathan has authored several highly regarded books analyzing the Middle East, and his insights are frequently sought by policymakers, journalists, and experts alike. He has been a tireless advocate for truth and clarity in a world often clouded by misinformation. With so much happening, from the evolving war in Israel and the role of Iran to the shifting strategy in Washington and beyond, we couldn't think of a better person to break it all down for us. Jonathan, welcome back to the show.
My pleasure, Trudy. Good to be with you.
So great to have you. So let's just delve right into what's happening. So much is going on. So with regards to Ukraine, last week we saw the unusual incident where Zelensky was thrown out of the Oval Office. Do you think this was a deliberate strategic move? What message was it meant to send? Also, do you think, Jonathan, that it was about pressuring Europe to step up, or was it signaling a shift in U.S. priorities, or was it something else entirely? So I'd love to know what you think about the administration's broader strategy towards Ukraine in light of all of this. And just to throw in a final question, do you think it has anything to do with the fateful phone conversation that President Trump had all those years ago, where it resulted in his impeachment?
Okay, so I don't know if I can answer all of those questions, but I can tell you this, that there is a significant wing of the Republican Party that has grown weary of this war with Ukraine. Not because they are necessarily pro-Putin, although some of them may be. But I would say that the strategy of giving Ukraine just enough not to lose, but never enough to win, while draining the coffers of the U.S. Treasury, spending down taxpayer dollars, and pushing the world closer and closer to conflict with a near-peer competitor, just didn't seem smart. And I think people like J.D. Vance in particular have been the most outspoken on this, although I think Donald Trump is very much in line with this as well. So what I think, what we watched play out was a situation where, the U.S. had actually come up with a solution. The Trump administration had come up with this idea of having the U.S. take over rare earth deposits and to begin to mine and to produce these rare earth materials. These are the sorts of things that go into the batteries of electric cars. It's just, and chips. This is, the technology of the future here we're talking about. The U.S. was willing to become a partner with the Ukrainians. And that was going to come at a nice premium for the United States. We were going to, get a $500 million or so deal, and it was going to repay us for the money that we had already spent, the 130-something billion dollars that we'd spent in Ukraine, but with the idea also that our presence there would deter Vladimir Putin for years and years to come. It was a fait accompli. All Vladimir Zelensky had to do was to go in, smile, say thank you, sign on the dotted line, have a nice lunch, and he didn't do so. Now, the way that Donald Trump responded, the way that J.D. Vance responded, I am not sure that's what we want to see in the Oval Office. I think Vladimir Putin was probably popping a bottle of champagne as he watched all of this unfold. But I think in the end, what we have watched is Zelensky coming around, understanding that the U.S. can actually buy him, I don't want to say peace, but at least can begin to restore the territorial integrity of Ukraine, bring an end to this war, and hopefully find a mutually beneficial financial agreement here that everybody can live with. That's what I think the strategy is. That's where I think we're heading. And it appears that this is now falling into place. And I'm hoping that this is the end of a crisis and that we can move on from this because there are other crises, as you know, Trudy, that await.
So just one point from what you said. I think it's really important for everybody to hear that that Oval Office opportunity, that PR op that we all saw unfold on television last week, that was not as planned. That was not a strategy that JD Vance had planned on, admonishing Zelensky. It was that Zelensky actually reneged on a deal that they had actually had. Is that right?
That's what we understand. I mean, look, I think that JD Vance probably did not mind an opportunity to admonish Zelensky for, maybe looking this gift horse in the mouth, so to speak. I think that, with that, what JD Vance did played well among his supporters. But no, this was a meeting that had gone off the rails. This was a meeting that was supposed to be perfunctory. It was supposed to be a photo op. It was supposed to be, they had already gotten to yes. That Donald Trump has always seen himself as a deal maker, and he had this deal, and it looked like it was, a done deal. And then all of a sudden, things began to, by the way, there are those that believe that Zelensky had just talked to, Chris Murphy and other senators who were urging him to ask for more, to ask for security guarantees, to, push back on some of the things that Donald Trump had said. This is not what you do when you go to the Oval Office in front of cameras. And you could have seen the reaction of the ambassador from Ukraine to the United States. I think you could even see the reaction of Marco Rubio. These are people that didn't want to see this occur, and it was like a train wreck happening in real time. And it shouldn't have happened that way. But to get to your other point, though, Trudy, I do think that all of this has absolutely spurred the Europeans to begin to think more about more defense spending, um, you know, holding up their end of the bargain, and to begin to think about taking responsibility for Europe and to take responsibility for the front with Russia because the United States is pivoting to great power competition with China, and because we're concerned about a Middle East that needs to be brought to heel. All of these things, I think, make a lot of sense. You're beginning to get a sense. Like, it's funny. I would tell you, I'll be the first to tell you, there was no Trump doctrine in the first administration. It was just whatever the president felt like tweeting or saying, and he would often do so in the middle of the night, and I'd wake up the next day, roll my eyes, and have to figure out how to explain this to people abroad or people at home. I actually see more of a doctrine right now. I don't want to say that Trump has it all figured out, or that he's coordinating closely with all of his most senior advisors, but I do think that we're beginning to get a sense that Europe needs to defend its corner of the world. The US is going to start to engage with China in a more fulsome way, and the US is going to try to keep Latin America as a sphere of our own and to keep the Chinese and the Russians out. And the Middle East remains a crucial area for us, and we're going to, I think, try to broker new agreements and new understandings, and maybe even, God forbid, peace in that part of the world. That this appears to be the very ambitious global plan for Donald Trump.
So do you think that this had, like the Zelensky train wreck event, had anything to do with the phone call leading to the impeachment? We know that President Trump definitely holds these things as very important. Or no, you don't feel it had anything to do with that?
Look, Donald Trump has a long memory, and he can be vindictive when he wants to be, as I suppose anybody can. I don't know. I don't know what he was thinking. I don't know whether this is something that crept into his mind. I do know that challenging policies that are embraced by Democrats, and upending what they consider to be sort of sacrosanct, policies. He has got no problem doing that, and he knows that it plays well to his base. Whether it's something that's more personal to him than that, I don't know. But basically challenging an ally that seemed to um, I think expect American assistance, saw it as a right rather than a privilege. This was a this was an opportunity for the president to unleash and to please his base and to stand on certain principles. Again, I don't want to say that he's thought through all of this and that it all makes sense, but I think in this narrow kind of vision of what happened at the Oval, that I think that's a safe bet.
Yeah, I think that Zelensky really, really played a bad card there. And, it was obvious when he actually came crawling back, very, very bad way to ask for something from someone, to come in there with such vindictiveness.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't, I think the guy is incredibly brave. I think the Ukrainians obviously did not start this war. I think that what Donald Trump has said about him being a dictator, I don't buy. There's a lot of things where, I'm not saying that I love everything that's come out of this White House, but at the end of the day, the idea of spending good money after bad in trying to maintain a tie effectively with Russia does not, I just don't see the logic. I will say, by the way, that there is something really positive that's come out of this war, which is that we've bled the Russian army. We've exposed Russia for being far weaker than we previously thought it was, and we did so with a relatively small amount of money. But that doesn't mean that we want to continue spending that money when we are not going to get anything else out of it. This seems like a good time to try to broker a new understanding. I hope we don't see Vladimir Putin as an ally or as a friend. I don't want to engage with him in that way. I still think that he is a malign actor in the region. But that doesn't mean that the president wasn't right to try to end this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, to give America, the opportunity to mine these rare earth materials, and to hopefully defend Ukraine from further aggression. This seems like if it's all done the way that Donald Trump envisions, we actually may end up with a positive outcome here, and that would be welcome.
That would be fantastic. Bringing us to another area of conflict in the world, the Middle East. So there was the recent ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas. Do you think that this has given Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran the opportunity to rearm and regroup? And what are their capabilities compared with where they were before the conflict began? I had, and I'm sure most of the people listening had thought that these capabilities were greatly diminished. We've seen so much destruction in Gaza and as well with Hezbollah, but yet is it diminished enough to affect Israel's security going forward?
So it's a good question. I mean, look, I'll just say that Israel never, as I understand it, Israel never intended to go into phase 2 of this hostage deal. So the idea was that it was going to be, it was going to be something that was going to be 5 or 6 weeks. And then Israel's goal was to go back into Gaza and finally defeat Hamas. I think, we may see an extension of the ceasefire through Ramadan and through Passover. So basically through, maybe mid-April. That's what Israel's trying to achieve right now without agreeing to phase 2 of the hostage deal, because phase 2 means accepting Hamas as a permanent fixture in the Gaza Strip and ending the war, which is not something that I think anybody is going to be willing to do within the current Israeli government. So then the question becomes, what happens if Israel goes back into Gaza, whether it's in 6 hours or it's in 6 weeks? What does that look like when Israel goes back in? Yes, I think Hamas has had an opportunity to get a little bit stronger. And maybe some of Hamas's allies within the Iranian axis may have also had an opportunity to regroup and rebuild. But I think when we take a look around at all of these fronts, most of them are not what they were. I mean, Syria doesn't exist anymore, as the Assad regime has fallen. And it to me does not seem like that's a front that will continue. Iraq, I'm not sure that the Iraqi militias want to keep firing on the
Wait,
United States and Israel.
before you go on, why do you think that Syria is not a threat?
Oh, it's a threat.
It
There's an Al
seems like
Qaeda government.
yes.
There's an Al Qaeda government there, but I don't know if they're ready to go to war.
Okay.
They're still trying to get their feet under them. They've only been in power for about 3 months. And the last thing that you probably want to do as a weak and unstable government that doesn't even control all the territory in Syria is to engage in a war with the most powerful military force in the Middle East. That doesn't make any sense, I think, from a strategic perspective. I mean, I don't rule out, by the way, a really stupid Al Qaeda government that's, being guided by the Turks, and that they're essentially a proxy of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's possible, but I think it's not a high likelihood. And again, similarly, I would say that Iraq doesn't seem very likely. The war in Gaza will not be the same war in Gaza. It will not be as tough. I think, much of Hamas's strength has been sapped. Hezbollah, also weaker, not entirely devoid of power, but weaker than it was. 2/3 of its arsenals destroyed. Most of its senior leadership have been killed. They're in a weak spot. They can still fight, but to what end, right? We have to start to ask ourselves this. So when I look at the fronts that are likely to heat back up, if Israel goes into Gaza, I mean, obviously Gaza is a front unto itself. I expect the West Bank to continue to be a problem. We've seen it over the last couple of weeks. Terrorist attacks that have been thwarted, terrorist cells that are active. So I say the West Bank is a problem for stability for Israel. And I would say that the Houthis in Yemen represent a real threat. The big question mark in my mind right now, so you're looking at really a three-front war. If we're going to, as opposed to 7, that's still a lot of fighting, Trudy, right? Like you don't welcome a 3-front war, but it's better than a 7-front war. The big question in my mind is Iran itself. And here, I got to say, this is where I think there are opportunities for Israel that they didn't have before. The air defenses of Iran are destroyed. Their ballistic missile production capabilities are almost nil. They don't have an unlimited arsenal. And I mean, I think right now they've got something like 2,000 ballistic missiles, and Israel has a clear shot at all of them. For the big question in my mind right now is actually not whether Israel goes back into Gaza or whether the West Bank heats up or the Houthis get back into the action. It's really whether Israel wants to try to take advantage of this window of weakness that they created back in October. Now, the Biden administration did not want the Israelis to do anything during that period between the election and inauguration. They said, you're not allowed. Trump said he agreed that he didn't want Israel waging war while the transition took place because he didn't need that kind of chaos. And that he wanted, he wanted to be able to be inaugurated with all the fanfare and to not have that dark cloud kind of looming over everything. But we're past all of that now. And the Israelis, I think, have a good, I don't know, let's say 4 to 6 months before this window of weakness closes. And somehow the Iranians are able to get some of their defenses back up and running, or maybe to find ways to put themselves on a more aggressive posture with Israel. So there is a really fascinating moment here where the Israelis have an opportunity to work with the Trump administration to talk about the future of this shared threat. What they do, I don't know. But I do know that that meeting between Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu in the White House back in, I guess it was early February, was probably one of the most consequential meetings between the leaders of our two countries in our history.
That is unbelievable. And I guess we're going to see what happens probably in the not too far off future, because I don't think the window is going to be for that long.
Correct.
So what do you think about President Trump's ultimatums to Hamas regarding the release of the hostages? Do you think that that's effective? He's made that all hell will break loose comment, a few weeks ago, And now, after meeting with the hostages in the Oval Office yesterday, he again said, all in essence, you release them or else. So,
Yeah.
does that have any leverage? How is Hamas going to respond to these ultimatums? Doesn't seem like they're responding at all.
Well, it's interesting, Trudy, because the this ultimatum also comes amidst what is now reported to be direct talks between Hamas and the United States. This I don't think has ever been done before. It appears that Stephen Witkoff's team is actually engaging directly with Hamas in Qatar, and so it's a little bit of good cop, bad cop here, I think, where they're engaging and they're sort of trying to be constructive and maybe even acknowledging Hamas's existence by having these talks. And then, and then you have Trump come thundering in, making these demands of Hamas. Now, I will say, I am not sure what Trump's threats will do, because, Trump's already given Israel all the weapons that it needs in order to win this war. And everybody already knows that Israel has the backing of the Trump administration to go back in if they want to, without the sort of constraints that we may have seen from the Biden folks and, the warnings about war crimes and all sorts of other things that, may have tempered Israel's operations inside the Gaza Strip. So I think Hamas knows what's coming. They've got to be bracing for it. And I don't know if Trump saying it out loud makes it any more real, but one does get a sense that the pressure is building on Hamas to release these hostages and to end the conflict. And by the way, that is, if we're able to get that done, that solves for a lot of problems. It doesn't solve for Hamas's continued existence in the Gaza Strip. That's another problem that we're going to have to wrestle with. But I'd say, it'll be a lot easier to negotiate the future of Hamas in Gaza, or the lack thereof. A lot easier to do that with the hostages returned home, alive or dead. Just get them all out so that we can get past this crisis and then get on to the question of what do we do next.
Do you think that will happen?
I don't know. But I will tell you, Donald Trump is doing something that I think the Biden administration should have done from the beginning, which is to threaten Hamas directly, to warn them that, we're giving Israel everything that it is going to need in order to vanquish the group. And I think they have to be aware now that, the pressure is building.
Obviously, their trump card, no pun intended, is that they have the hostages and
Yeah.
they know that we want them.
But
So
they've given up the ones that Israel is going to be most concerned about: women, children, elderly, injured, sick. Right now, what's left, and it's not to say that I want these people to be sacrificed, but you have, young men of fighting age. These are people that I think Israel is looking at not as expendable, but as possible casualties of war. And the idea is that I don't think Israel is going to hold back. If it goes back into the Gaza Strip again, it will be a different kind of fight. One where Israel is far less careful about those tunnels the way they were before. They weren't attacking the tunnels because they were afraid of killing hostages. I have a feeling that if Israel goes back in now, we may be looking at very different tactics, tougher tactics than we saw before. Maybe a little bit more willingness to suffer casualties, knowing that these are people that are enlisted in the IDF.
very interesting. And what do you think about the fact that they still have one American hostage? Like, why aren't they releasing that person?
Well, that's where I think the Trump administration is going to come down on them like a ton of bricks. This is like the one thing that Donald Trump does not put up with is American hostages. So I think this is the real leverage that the U.S. has right now. But getting one hostage out is not the same as getting them all out and ending this crisis. So it sounds like, they're pursuing multiple tracks at once. I think that trying to just get the one hostage out is not the right strategy, but we know that that's a big part of it.
What do you think about President Trump's plan for Gaza after this is over?
I don't see there being much of a plan, but I do think it is he has started a conversation. And that's what's so important here is he said, look, you don't like mine? Fine. come up with one on your own. And now that's exactly what the Egyptians have done. The Egyptians have a plan where they say they want to spend $53 billion in Arab funds, not American funds, but Arab funds, to rebuild Gaza over 5 years. The biggest problem with their plan right now is they don't have a solution for Hamas. And that's what I think we're waiting for. That's why so far the Arab plan is a non-starter, but we'll see it, I think, continue to evolve. And that's actually the brilliant thing about what happened here with Trump. He pulled a page right out of the Art of the Deal, where you start off with something that's going to seem so outlandish to the other side. They disagree with it fervently, and then they say, well, here's what we want. And that's where the conversation begins in earnest. So let's hope that this now turns into a dialogue that yields a plan, and that we begin to build a different future for the Gaza Strip, and maybe even, God forbid, start to look at a region that, has the potential for peace.
Wow, I actually want to take a page out of that book and use this negotiating tactic. It seems very effective.
Yeah.
I want to just turn our attention for a brief second to the college campuses. And why is there this escalation of all of the agitation on the college campuses with what we've seen at Barnard, closing down of a building? I would have thought with the legislation that has been passed and with Trump in the White House really willing to not sanction, but pull federal funding from these universities and really come down hard, that this would have stopped. But yet recently it's just blown up.
Yeah. The story is that, we're heading into phase 2 of the war. And in my mind, this is exactly what happened last time. As everybody understood that the region was heading into war, you had all of these student activists that were galvanized by pro-Hamas forces. We know who some of them are. They're getting the students ready again for phase 2. And they want to put more pressure on Israel, political pressure, to try to curtail their freedom of action, to try to generate outrage here in the United States, to try to impose a cost on the government here in terms of trying to keep a lid on some of the chaos. This is the tactic that they used last time. I suspect it's the tactic we'll use now. By the way, it's also happening just as things are getting a little warmer. Kids can be outside for longer. It's going to allow for this kind of freedom of action. I hope that Task Force 10-7, that Donald Trump's task force to crack down on anti-Semitism and pro-Hamas sentiment, I hope that this is the response that the U.S. government has to ensure that this kind of chaos doesn't continue.
Who is behind this? What entity is
behind? Well, we've seen a bunch of them, but there's a group called American Muslims for Palestine. They're the #1 group that's incubated SJP. There's a group called Sami Doon that's connected with the PFLP. They've been designated. There are, and then there's, of course, the, this sort of socialists, communists, and other radical actors that are on campus as well that are, I would call them supporting actors. Some Chinese funding, some Qatari funding, some Russian funding. These are all things that we're tracking. It's a messy cocktail, but we can see these forces right now getting ready to push for, push back on Israel's, expected foray into the Gaza Strip.
So sadly, we are at the end of our time with you, Jonathan. And as always, your insights are invaluable in helping us understand the complex and ever-changing dynamics of the Middle East and beyond. Your deep knowledge and clarity brings so much to the conversation, and we truly appreciate your time and expertise. With so much still unfolding, from Israel's ongoing fight against terror to the shifting global strategies of the U.S., Russia, China, and Iran, we know this won't be the last time we'll need your analysis. And we hope you'll come back soon to continue breaking it down with all of us. Thank you for joining us today. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in to Nothing But the Truth. Stay informed, stay engaged, and we will see you next time.